Hello there, my friends. Today I want to speak to you about the Muslim madrassa system and why it's such a dangerous system. Why it, in my finding and in my study, represents such a destructive force and such a destructive intervention in the lives of Muslim children and youngsters. Now, as you might well know from the channel, I've spent most of my life being an educationist, and in the past 5 years or 6-7 years I also completed a doctorate in education, and so I know my way around educational methodologies and the philosophy and the psychology that forms part of education. And so what I did was I cast my mind back to my own experience as a toddler, as a child in a Muslim school. And for those of you who are not Muslim, you might have seen, that Muslims have these special schools, extra remedial work, or extra classes, additional classes to the regular school. And I was one of those children from a very young age. I think from my first year at regular school, in other words grade 1, I started attending a Muslim school, and that basically paralleled my regular secular / Western schooling for all of my primary school years, for my first 7 years of schooling, and then also for some of the years of my high school years. So maybe up till the age of 15 or so I attended a madrassa. And reflecting on that experience, and I will go into more detail now, what I find to be the problem. And I also obviously had children who attended madrassa, and my experience of the Muslim madrassa system is that in education we have a gradual evolution of the methodology. We have a gradual transformation of the teaching methodology. Normally in modern education, which I regard still as very effective and a very sound system of educating people, we have an evolution from a memorization / rote means of instruction, which takes place at a very young age. So small children at preschool or during the first years of primary school will learn through memorization and through rote learning and through repetition, and that's really the best way of teaching children at a very, very young age, to learn the basics. In other words, to learn counting, to learn the alphabet, to learn the days of the week, to learn. So the child is not only socialized by means of memorizing certain elements of their society, like the songs, the rhymes, the known, the commonly accepted understandings and known phrases. Like in religion, maybe the child might learn the basics of their religion. If it's Christian religion, they would learn the basics of that. Muslim religion, the same. So the first few years of a child's education would be spent on rote learning, memorization and repetition. And that's the best way of teaching children at that age. Of course, there will be a minimal level of reflection thinking, critical thinking, but critical thinking and reflection would not be the essential methodology during the first years. The problem with Muslim madrassas is that the rote learning, the memorization, the repetition never really stops. It continues. And although in our times, in modern times, I've seen an attempt at some Western colleges, Muslim schools, to incorporate some sort of independent critical thinking. The unfortunate fact is that in my experience and in the experience of my children, that repetition memorization process never really ended. Even when I reached the age of 14, 15, I was still required to memorize. And then when I went to Egypt and spent 2 years at an institution called the Al-Azhar, I realized that even there, the teacher will basically recite to you the facts or the truths or the lesson or the knowledge, and your job is to memorize and to accept the recited facts that are recited to you. And that is at an advanced level, you know, because I've seen sometimes my colleagues who went as high as university complain about the same problem, is that they are being asked to memorize and to reproduce information that was created in a different era and in a different time. So how do they do it? How do they succeed in this type of education, which is basically what I refer to as indoctrination? It's not education, it's not learning, it is basically indoctrinating or conditioning the subject. So these conditioning schools, or these indoctrination centers, the madrassas, how do they succeed? You see, because children obviously will experience some sort of difficulty or hardship in not questioning certain things. So there comes the reality of coercion and violence. You see, my experience of madrasa was that violence was ever present. The threat of violence was ever present. And I myself experienced it at least on one severe occasion and on other less severe occasions. On one occasion, I was sitting with the Maulana, or what we call, you know, a priest or a teacher, and I made a mistake in reciting the letters on the page, and the guy lifted his hand and he started pinching my cheek. I was standing right next to him and he was looking at how I was reciting, and he started pinching my cheek. I can't remember if it was this cheek or this cheek, and I thought, he's doing it in a funny way. He's just playful. But then that guy, I must have been about, say, 8, 9, 10 years old, round about there. I'm not exactly sure. I think it was about 9 or 10. And this guy proceeded to press so hard on my cheek and to turn it, to twist it so hard, that I started crying, and I started thinking, oh, it's no longer a joke. This guy is seriously, he's hurting me. And it twisted my cheek so hard that I actually had a soreness in my face for a few days. And I just couldn't make sense of it. And as the weeks went by, I just thought that, why did Maulana do that to me? Why did he hurt me like that? And I couldn't make sense of it. And then I realized that it's like, I just need to understand that he has the power over me, that he can hurt me if I don't follow suit. And then there's another incident. You know, one of my own children went to madrasa, and initially I sent them to madrasas, and I took them out shortly, you know, after a year or two. I removed them from these centers, because these centers are dangerous places for children. And my daughter, whom I love very much, she was sitting in class one day, and she came home to me from madrasa, and she told me she got hit by something. And I asked by what, and she said the duster, the duster heater. I said, well, how did the duster, the board cleaner, the eraser, how did that the teacher uses, how did that hit you, or how did it get, you know? And she said, no, the teacher was aiming at a child in front of me and it hit me. And I was just disgusted in hearing that story, that the teacher was like throwing missiles at children in the class. And it obviously correlated with my own memory of madrasa, where these teachers, not all of them, let me make that very, very clear. I'm not saying this is the practice of all Muslim teachers, but it's definitely my experience with some of my teachers, where they would verbally abuse you, they would physically abuse you. And I'm not so, I've never experienced sexual abuse, like, you know, we've heard the stories about the Catholic Church and so on, but never ever have I experienced anything like that. So I'm telling you this, and I'm going to make a part 2 of this video to tell you that these indoctrination centers are places where children are not taught, they are conditioned. And we know, as an educationist myself, that which you instill in a child between the ages of birth and 8 years will stay with them for the rest of their lives. So if you've made them afraid of the authorities, if you've made them afraid of the priest, if you've made them afraid of the Muslim teacher, You've scared them for life. And many of you watching this video, I'm sure, you toe the line because psychologically you've been taught at that madrassa, you Muslims I'm speaking to toe the line. You have got more fear of these devils than you have of God Almighty, the creator of the universe. I'm not speaking to all of you, but I'm saying to you, it's time to wake up. It's time that we realize that these people have indoctrinated us. They have messed around with our minds. They've used coercion, they've used threats, they've used violence, they've used emotional abuse to coerce us into accepting the facts that you are now accepting about Islam, the false information. Let me tell you something else also, finally, to close down. Another famous tool that I was used to at madrassa was the idea of emotional or social exclusion or social alienation. So we would, as a rule, always become aware that if you don't follow the way the teacher is telling you, or the madrassa or the khalifa or the ustaz is teaching you, then you would be a bad person, you would be an evil person. And they often, we would amongst ourselves look at other Muslims who did not make salah prayers, ritual prayers, or did not wear Muslim attire as bad people, and Christians were bad people, and other people generally, that judgmental mentality is drilled into you, that if you don't do it like this, you're a bad person. And that is the type of brainwashing and psychological damage that 80% of the Muslims suffer with, and that is why you have a problem in the world. May Allah, or we ask God, to let people realize that they are not onto something good when they follow these satanic priests, and that they are following the devil in fact, and hopefully they will return to the righteous path.